and answer session. So I'll just bring you up, Andy, and I'll start throwing some questions your way because we had a few given to us prior to today's live stream. So I'm going to start with Jed's question if I can. You recently spoke about the barriers of doubt within the student medium, and you stated that the teacher could only give tools to help remove the barriers. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, so I think when we begin to look at our own mediumship, and if you go back, through all the mediumistic experiences that you've had, you'll find that there will come a time when there'll be a moment within your mediumship where everything's just worked by itself. You haven't done anything. You've perhaps had very little training, but in that moment, you simply surrender to that power. You really get into the power of it, and it becomes effortless, and that story just unfolds of the person's life in a very natural way. So what I think that actually teaches us is that your soul knows what it needs to do, and in terms of your ability to understand the experiences, it's a very natural part of who you are. So there's nothing there to teach, actually. When we find that state of mind and we prepare ourselves correctly and we develop the right qualities internally, we can consistently then begin to surrender to that power. And once we surrender to that power, it just works. But what holds us back is that there'll be certain qualities within ourselves that we perhaps haven't fully developed, or there's certain fears, certain insecurities that stop us from surrendering to the degree that's needed for the mediumship just to work naturally. So one of the main roles of the teacher is to actually help educate people about their own inner world and to develop that so that we can develop the right qualities within us, so that the mediumship which can support the mediumship and help it to flourish. That means overcoming certain fears, overcoming certain insecurities, but developing the right inner qualities. And then also there's certain aspects and certain habits that people form when expressing the mediumship that actually stops them from surrendering fully. And that's really things that will cause the medium within the mediumistic expression to actually take control of the contact. When we're talking about surrender, we're talking about allowing the spirit world to express what they need in whatever way it can be manifested, and allowing them to lead the communication, and the medium has to follow them. And there's certain things that mediums can do that can cause the medium to lead the communication, and then the spirit world we're kind of fighting with the spirit person, or struggling with the spirit person, because they want to express what they need, and we're taking control and leading, and that will stop us from surrendering and the mediumship happening naturally. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And I think we talked about this in a recent interview we did on YouTube as well. So if you want to go back and have a look at that, just have a look on the Spirit's Voice channel. Okay, so I've got one from Gina, and she says, what was your biggest discovery about your mediumship, and what tools can you teach from that discovery?
Yeah, I think when I look back at the very beginning of my own development, I never really had difficulty in understanding the visual experiences that I was becoming aware of. And I think in my early mediumship, although I could always give quite detailed practical information, there wasn't always that presence of the spirit within my work, because I wasn't harnessing and using the emotion enough. I mean, in order for the mediumship to work, you have to be sensing and working with the essence of the communicator through the emotion, but it's about the degree to which you place emphasis on that aspect. And I would say it took me about 8 years to really learn how to focus on the emotion within the communication, and really allowing that emotion to rise within me, and to really develop those qualities within myself, where I could allow that emotion within me to come right to the surface, and then to have the strength to hold the emotion very much at the surface of my own conscious mind. Because when we allow the emotion to come and we allow it to rise within us and we allow it to be right on the surface, it's at that point then that as that power emanates from us through that emotion, the presence of the spirit person starts to become manifested. And for me, that's what true mediumship is. It's not about, okay, having good detailed practical information as well as personality and emotional information is really important. But because that really tells us who the communicator is and discerns who that communicator is that's coming. But true mediumship is where the presence of the spirit world is felt by everybody. That is, that the medium can emanate that power of the spirit. And that only happens, like I've said, when you work with the emotions, allow them to come right to the surface. And then rather than trying to suppress them or back away from them, you have the strength to allow them to remain there, so that that presence then can emanate from you and touch everybody that's present. And that was for me, the big thing that I discovered is that you don't actually, if you really refine working within the emotion and the essence of the communicator, you don't actually need to see very much, because when you really work within that essence and you use the emotion in a way of sensing the experiences and reliving the experiences of the spirit person, then what you find is that we have this knowing. And for me, that knowing is the best form. It's actually the most sublime form of mediumship, because you haven't got to see anything, you haven't got to hear anything, you haven't got to understand anything. You just know, because you've become the communicator. And the more, as the medium, that we can consistently achieve that state, and therefore, like I said in the prior question, that depends on developing the right qualities, learning how to work within the emotion, refining that emotion, strengthening that emotion within ourselves, and of course developing a really open and honest relationship with ourselves so we can allow those emotions to come. Then you'll find that we can achieve that state of knowing in a much more consistent way. And that, for me, then is the mark of a really good medium.
Everyone who's joining us, thank you for being patient with us over the last couple of days. If you've got some questions, throw them in the comment section. We'll try and get to them shortly. I've got another one from Jed, if we can, Andy. You mentioned that the hold of attunement can fluctuate during a contact, and that experienced mediums should be able to know how to react to that fluctuation in order to gain a better hold within the blend again. Would it be possible to expand upon this and maybe offer some practical advice?
Yeah, so what I think we've got to begin to recognise is that we like to think of ourselves, okay, I've either surrendered to that power or I haven't surrendered to that power, or I'm in touch with the spirit world or I'm not in touch with the spirit world, or I'm aware of my communicator or I'm not aware of my communicator. We like to think of things in a binary way, either black or white. Whereas in reality, it's all about the degree to which we do something. So you are able to surrender to a degree. And what we have to remember, that these states of awareness that we're kind of we're consciously moving ourselves into, fluctuate all the time. You know, even in our own normal waking state of consciousness, when we're just navigating the world in a normal way, the state of consciousness that we are experiencing changes every single moment. And that's exactly the same as what happens within the mediumistic aspect. So it's not a state that when we're blending with the spirit, once we've blended with them and we've surrendered to them, it's not a static state where we just stay in that. You know, we try to train ourselves to stay as much as we can. But what you'll find will happen is that it will be fluctuating. The degree to which you're becoming, so imagine my two hands are two souls and they're becoming, the degree to which you're becoming the communicator is fluctuating all of the time. And that means that if you look at a communication, just a single one, there'll be moments within that communication where you've really surrendered with the communicator and it's working really well. And there'll be certain moments that might be a bit more of a struggle because we're actually coming out of that state of surrendering to a lesser degree, and then it might go back into a deeper state of surrender than it was before. So the mediumistic experiences that we're going to experience within a single communication, let alone within a whole demonstration, are going to be different. And the degree to which you're blending and surrendering is going to be different all the time. So what that means is that as the medium is that we have to learn that when, and again, people say, well, Andy, how do you recognize when you are blending or when you are really surrendering and when you're not? Well, when you get that response from the recipient, yes or no, that's telling you an awful lot about the experience that you're having. If you're really effortlessly unfolding that narrative about the communicator's life, and we're finding that depth within the evidence, and we're also really experiencing the emotion of the communicator, it's pretty safe to say that we are becoming, or if not become, that communicator. We're blending and surrendering to quite a large degree. When we start to get no's, not just one but several of them, it's telling us that, okay, that blending now and that surrendering is not being achieved to the same degree. If it was, we'd be understanding that moment because of that knowing that we would be experiencing. And so what we have to, again, and it's not so much about, people always want a cheat or they want a quick tip on how to overcome these things. And the true answer is that there isn't a cheat and there isn't a quick tip and there isn't really something that you can do. It's about, again, your inner world. What have we developed those qualities within ourselves that can allow us to handle that? So the first thing is, if it's about our intentions, it's about, why are we doing it? So if it's about you as the medium, you're on this platform demonstrating in front of these people because you want to look good, or even on the other hand, there's a fear there that you're scared of looking stupid or people judging you, or that you don't want to make a mistake, you're too self-conscious, you're not going to go beyond the self and become aware of the spirit world, because all of your energy and your thoughts are about you, and that stops you from just allowing yourself to have an experience, and you start playing safe and second guessing. So that's a big thing, is what are the, really being in a place where you're relaxed, where you're at ease with yourself, where you're willing, don't care about the results of that particular communication, you're just willing to have an experience and to experience, having no tension within yourself. That is a big thing, because any sort of tension within yourself will stop you from surrendering fully. The second thing is, it can also be about the way that you're working with the spirit world. If you're asking questions up here in your conscious mind, what's your name, where do you come from, how did you pass, you're taking control of that communication. Because if I had a conversation with you and I said, where do you come from, where do you live, what sort of house was it, what do you do as a job, who's leading that conversation? The person asking the question or the person receiving them? Well, it's the person asking them. So it can be certain things that we're trying to do within the mediumship itself, like having these very rigid structures where we have to get certain type of information in a particular order for every communication. That isn't going to allow the spirit person to express what they need. We're kind of enforcing a sort of cookie cutter approach on every contact. That's going to make you take control. Asking these questions is going to make you take control. Not having the correct qualities within yourself is going to make you take control. So we have to break down all of those barriers, and there isn't a quick answer to that. It's through experience, it's through developing the right spiritual practices, like sitting in the power. It's about accepting that you're a medium, so that you haven't got anything to prove to yourself or to prove to others. You're willing just to have that experience. And of course, it's about getting really good training and actually being taught by somebody that is not going to allow these habits to be formed in the first place. And that's really the biggest piece of advice, is get good training.
Great advice. Donna says, how do you deal with spirit people who come in just to cause havoc in the reading? Some are just troublemakers.
I have to be honest, it's never happened. Like, what we have to remember is that every single communicator that comes has a need, and there's a need to communicate, or what I call a will to communicate. And this will kind of add to what I've said in the prior question too. it's that power of love that unites those souls together. So from the spirit side, it's the reason that those people communicate is because of the love that they share for their loved one. And so the people that come in that will actually come to communicate will be wanting, in whatever way, whether that's to say sorry for something that's been done in the past, whether it's to offer words of encouragement, whether it's just to say, I love you, I'm here. There will be a loving intention behind the communication itself. And from the medium's point of view, this adds to what I said last time about what it is to surrender. What I think happens quite a lot of the time is that we don't treat the spirit people as real people. We see them as pieces of information, and we play this game of getting information right or wrong. So one of the things that I always try to instill in my own work and the students' work is that we can never forget the sacredness of the experience that were taking place. Now, if you imagine for a second that you have one more day with your loved one, what would it be like, if your mum or dad walked into the room, sat down next to you, and we started talking again? What would that mean to you? That's really what we are doing as the medium for the communication, for the recipient. We're facilitating that moment in time again. And so the medium blends with the spirit world through that love of service for wanting to provide that experience for someone. And you've got to always be in touch with that intention of what we're trying to achieve. So in my experience, and I can say this and look at you in the eye, I've done a couple of thousand now demonstrations of mediumship, and let's say that in that time I've done 10 contacts in a demonstration. There's probably more and there's probably less than sometimes. So probably around 20,000 communications in a public way. Touch wood, every single communication contact that I've ever given has been accepted by a recipient. I've never had a contact where it's not been understood by somebody. Touch wood. I don't want to jinx myself, but hopefully that will continue. And that tells me that there isn't these sort of troublemaking spirit people that are trying to cause havoc and make things not work. What I think sometimes can happen, well, let me say this first, that the fact that that's happened to me, that in thousands of contacts have always been understood, it isn't because I'm special. It's because I've understood and trained and have become competent in establishing my communicator. That is to find very early on, within the first minute, 30 seconds to 1 minute of that experience, identifying who my communicator is and which person in the room it's for. When we have perhaps these experiences where we can't find the recipient or nobody understands the information, rather than saying, okay, that's this mischievous spirit person who's just trying to cause trouble and make things not work, I think we have to look at ourselves as the medium. That actually is a spirit person that relates to these people in the room and they're wanting to communicate and connect, but actually we've just not understood our experience properly. We might have misunderstood a part of that experience, which throws that contact out and skews it where people can't understand, or perhaps we haven't yet really polished and have mastered that skill of establishing the contact very quickly early on. So again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I can't say that because I'm not an oracle or all-knowing person about mediumship. All I can say is that in my own personal experiences, since 15, 16 years of experience, I've never had that happen to me. And so I can't say, well, yeah, it definitely does happen because I've not experienced it. So I think, I hope that answers the question. And again, I think if these things are happening to you, what we have to do is, rather than beat ourselves up now and start to getting all negative, is actually to go back when it happens again. What can we learn from that experience? Let's look at it critically and see actually what's happening. But we've got to remember that there is an overwhelming or an overriding intelligence that we're working with, and the spirit people are intelligent, and it is that love between two people that are bringing those communications together. So it wouldn't quite make sense for that to be the case for me, but that's not to say that is the definitive answer. So I hope that helps too.
Okay, now we have one from Eddie. Do you believe that spirit within ourselves has to be in a good place to reach full mediumistic potential?
Could you just repeat that question for me again, please?
So he says, do you believe that the spirit within ourselves has to be in a good place to reach full mediumistic potential?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we talked about this in the interview. I see lots of students going from seminar to seminar, from tutor to tutor, trying to spend all their time learning practical mediumship, these technical aspects of how to make a contact work and how to deepen evidence and how to establish contacts. They spend all their time on that and very little time on their own personal development. And I really believe it has to be the opposite way around. That is that we have to spend 90% of our training actually working on our own self and 10% on the technical development of mediumship. Without repeating things from yesterday, in my own personal experiences, before I started actually communicating with the spirit world, I spent a good 18 months, 2 years, just sitting in that power of my own soul and really getting to know myself. And what that did was to bring things to the surface, those mediumistic qualities brought to the surface, but also by having a really open and honest relationship with myself, which means to celebrate my positive traits and also to acknowledge the parts of my personality and qualities that are probably deficient in some way, and accepting those things and being aware of them, I became really comfortable with myself. And what we've got to remember within the mediumship is that when we're becoming, okay, the first thing is that everything comes and has its origin within the emotion. Everything, that's how the two souls or your soul is communicating with another soul. And as we become aware of those emotions within the communicator, it's actually triggering emotions that already exist within us. So when we become aware of that depression, for instance, within that father or mother, although that emotion is being triggered by the communicator, effectively it's our own sense or our own experience of that emotion, of that depression that's coming to the surface. So the more comfortable we are with all the different aspects of our life experiences, the more willing we are to experience them and to feel comfortable in that experience, to allow them to come to the surface. And when we've mastered articulating how we feel as individuals, what we will then find is that as we're blending through that emotion and having those emotional experiences, which is where everything comes from. So it's through the emotion that we begin to see and hear, but the emotion is the origin of it. The more willing we are and the more that we've mastered that emotional aspect of ourself, which is being triggered all the time within the mediumship, the deeper that mediumistic communication can become. And the final point is, if you think about what I'm actually saying, I'm saying that in every moment within your mediumistic expression, you're actually showing a group of strange people, of strangers. Some of them might be strange as well as being strangers, but nevertheless, a group of strangers. You're showing them your own vulnerabilities, and you're showing them the positive traits of who you are, because these emotions, as they're being triggered and are coming to the surface, are actually reflections of your own self. So if you're not comfortable with showing people your vulnerabilities because you're not comfortable with them yourself, that change can't actually take place. And I don't want to kind of spend too much time trying to get through as many questions as I can, but I think this story is actually something that I hope will bring everything together that I've said. I remember when I was probably about 22, 23 years of age, I organised a charity demonstration for cancer research in the UK. And I put some flyers out around my local town, because it was in my hometown where I was doing it. And I was expecting like 30 people to turn up, 40 people. So on the night of the actual demonstration, I get there about an hour before, just to put chairs out. And as I get to the venue, there's a queue going around the block. It's probably about 200, 300 people that turn up. And so I had to ring my dad quickly and say, look, Dad, you've got to come over, because I need help getting people through and setting up now, because there's so many people that have come to this thing. So my dad came. It's the first time he ever came to a demonstration. And, you know, he took the money, he sat there, he watched. And after the demonstration was over, I said to him, "So what did you think, Dad?" It's the first time he ever come, and he's sort of, he was my best friend, really. So he said, "Oh, yeah, Andy, that was great." So you're going to come again? You're going to start coming now? He's like, "I'll never come again." I said, "Why?" He said, "Andy, you was not my son when you was on that platform." And it wasn't that he was disowning me. It's that in that moment, he recognized that change that has to take place within the medium. That is that Andy that he knows, his son, begins to disappear, begins to become suppressed. And the true qualities of myself, the real me, that power of my soul, has to come to the surface. And we have to, you know, when I'm looking at mediums, student mediums, I'm not looking at their results. I'm looking at, does that change take place within them? Are we actually seeing that true quality of their own soul in that moment? Are they laying bare their own soul for everyone to see? Because unless that happens, I don't believe that transformation of the power can take place to the degree it needs to really allow ourselves to surrender and become the communicator. And the only way that change can take place is when we get to know ourselves well. Now, before I finish, that doesn't mean to say that I'm a saint and I'm perfect and I'm really in touch with myself and I know everything about myself and I accept everything about myself. I'm the first to say I'm still on that journey of understanding who I am, and every single day I work hard and spend time reflecting and exploring my inner world. And what it can mean is that perhaps that relationship I have with myself and the degree to which that power of my own soul has become real to me may be slightly greater than some other people, but it's not something that is over. It's a journey that I will be on until not only the day that I physically die, but it will continue in the spirit world. And so, you know, if we're not sitting regularly in the power, allowing that power to become real to us and getting to know ourselves, then we're really wasting our time developing our mediumship, because without that, nothing else can really unfold and develop.
You're getting a lot of people agreeing with you and thinking that's the best explanation of it. Can spirits that were not born, that passed while they were still in the womb, communicate in a reading? And do these unborn spirits then have to return to the spirit world?
Okay, so we're talking really either about you know, miscarriages or terminations, that sort of thing. Right? Okay, so I believe, very well, from my own experience, not a belief, it's what I've experienced within my mediumship, that those souls do communicate. That is, that the medium can become aware of them, but you'll find that it will never just be that the soul of that child. Okay, because if you think about it, if let's say we've had somebody's had a miscarriage, there's no life experience in terms of shared memories or experiences. It's very limited. You know, my mother had a stillborn child, and that child was on the earth for, you know, a matter of seconds. Now, if I look at my own mother, if I'm my own personal experience, you know, with my mom, that child who passed to the spirit world, that from stillborn, wouldn't really be able to express anything other than I was a stillborn child, because there's not that life experience that will come. So that doesn't mean that child, and we're talking here about, I'm not talking here about personal spiritual experiences. I'm talking about via a medium, you know. Doesn't mean that child can't come, but you find that they'll be accompanied by another person in the spirit world that we do have life experience, shared life experience with, that can then provide that experience of sharing their life, and so that we know, okay, the spirit world is present. So let's say, for instance, you know, my grandfather came and gave lots of information about his own life, and I understood it all. I would know then my granddad's there, so that when the medium then says, well, I know that you've got a brother in the spirit world who was stillborn, the fact that my grandfather's come and give evidence of his life lends credibility to the experience of that child that hasn't had lots of life experience. The other thing you've got to remember is, and this is again what we've got to keep going back to, the spirit world is just a continuation of this world. And I don't know anybody in this world that would let a 1-year-old, a baby of any kind, attend a communication with a medium by themselves. You know, I mean, how many times do we let 6-year-old children go to the theatre by themselves without accompaniment? It doesn't happen, you know, most of the time, hopefully. And this is what I'm saying, you know, if you've got a young child in the spirit world, of course they're going to be looked after by people in the family, as they would as they were here. So you'll always find that there'll always be another communicator that will come, that will add the evidence and help that child to communicate. So I think that's where I stand. And of course, if we're talking about having a personal experience that is not with a medium but a direct experience, well then of course that's a completely different kettle of fish, because you're having the experience yourself. It's not being communicated to you by a third person, i.e. the medium. So I hope that answers the question.
I think that Donna was just saying that obviously that's happened to her. She's had a visitation from that in that situation. And Mary Lou asks, are mediums considered clairvoyant? I think she means, are all mediums considered clairvoyant?
I think I probably have quite an unorthodox understanding of this, because for me, and this is like a lengthy explanation. I haven't got time to explain this properly here, but we have to understand that there are two different ways that we can experience mediumistic phenomena: what we call the subjective and what we call the objective. And if we're going to be very strict with the language, which I think we should be, because otherwise we start to misunderstand our own experiences, and especially from a teaching point of view, we begin to give misinformation to students, then clairvoyance and clairaudience, in the truest sense of the word, are the objective aspect of that experience. So that is where we're seeing something outside of the mind, or we're hearing something outside of the mind, and you know, that is really true clairvoyance and true clairaudience. When we're experiencing things subjectively, that's within inside the self, I actually believe that everything comes from clairsentience, but we have to sort of redefine what we mean by clairsentience. For me, what clairsentience is it's that part of the soul that enables you to blend and become at one with a communicator, which works and operates through the emotion. But that faculty of the clairsentience, that part of the soul that allows you to blend and become at one with the communicator, has different facets to it. It has what I'd call an aural facet, which means to hear subjectively, as a visual facet, to see subjectively, and it has an emotional facet. And the emotional facet is through which all other things happen. So for me, you know, why is that important for me? Well, when we start saying to people, okay, you're clairvoyant, what do? They start to look for a third eye somewhere, and they're all up here looking and everything. And they fail to see that the only way they're becoming aware of the spirit world or the communicator is actually through the blending of their soul with their communicator's soul, that surrendering which operates through the faculty of the clairsentience, that part of their soul that enables them to blend and become at one, which is governed by the emotion. And so they're not placing enough emphasis on the emotion within their communications. They're keeping the spirit world at arm's length, looking for everything and observing that world, rather than becoming and experiencing the communicator through the emotion. And as you start to experience the communicator through the emotion, then at certain times you may see and hear, but that comes from the emotion itself. And of course, then when people say to me, well, okay, so what's this knowing then? Well, the knowing is where these three different facets, the core facets of the clairsentience, the seeing, hearing, and feeling, are all being triggered and operating at the same time to the same degree. So the knowing is really where you're seeing, hearing, and feeling all at the same time in equal measure, which is why you don't get a prominent part of the experience and why it comes as a knowing. So I hope I've probably tried to reduce a 2-hour lecture there into like a 3-minute segment. So I hope I've managed to do it some justice.
You did well. Okay, David asks, hi Andy, any tips to deepen the connection with the communicator to bring through emotion rather than superficial information?
Yeah, the only way to do that is to get to know yourself, and actually to work on understanding your own emotions and to work on articulating your own emotions first. Like I've said, and I'll just reiterate this very quickly, and take a different line as we go on. When you're experiencing the emotion within the communicator, as I've said, although it's being triggered by the communicator, what's being triggered is emotions that exist within your own soul, within your own power, which is what you become consciously aware of. So when we understand that part and we accept that part, that, okay, what I'm experiencing my mediumship, although being triggered by the communicator, is actually part of my own experience, then when we start looking at the difficulties that we face when we work with the emotions, it becomes evident what we have to do. So there'll be two main problems that students or any sort of medium will face, which is, first of all, certain emotions will be triggered within the communication that we don't understand. And secondly, that sometimes we know what that emotion is, but we can't find the right words to adequately express it. And what that basically tells us, of course, is that there's no point looking at technique and exercises. I mean, practice will help to a degree because it forces you to experience and try to express emotion. But the true solution is that, well, look, okay, if there's emotions within my communication that I don't understand, and those emotions are being triggered by the communicator, but effectively my own emotions, it's telling me that there's certain emotions within me that I don't understand. And if there are emotions that are triggered, but I can't find the words to express them, then it's telling me, okay, well, I've not yet learned how to express these emotions within myself. So the only way to deepen the mediumistic expression is to get to know you and experience these different emotions and understand them through sitting in the power, self-reflection. Prayer can help. Writing journals is something that I'm really big on, because that when we start to write about ourselves, we're experiencing that emotions. But also, which is the second part, if we can't find the right words to express what we feel, then we've got to learn how to express ourselves properly. And of course, like, I'm not advocating that you all go home to your families and just start sort of having verbal diarrhea and telling everyone exactly how you feel all the time, because it gets quite heavy and it gets probably slightly annoying. But what we've got to do is, rather than necessarily expressing it to everybody all the time how I feel, I find writing is a really great way of giving a voice and exploring how you feel, but keeping it private and something that is just for you. And quite often when we look at, okay, like talking therapies, or talking about our emotions to our families and friends, what do we often do? Well, we often hide and omit the parts of that narrative or parts of that how we feel that might look bad on us. I mean, I do that. We all do that. I mean, that's human nature.
Mm.
And so when you're trying to sometimes discuss how you feel with people, you're not being truly honest with yourself, because you don't want people to judge you. But when you write it, you probably have more freedom, because okay, it's just for me, so I can actually be honest and really explore further. But that's the only way, to master your mediumship is to master yourself. It's a cliche because it's true, and there's no shortcuts. There's no other ways around it. The one other thing, word of advice I can give you is, so okay, well, how do I access these emotions within myself, and how do I begin to explore them? Well, sit in the power. Start your meditation practice. It can be mindfulness meditation through the Buddhist tradition. It can be sitting in the power, but focusing on developing, expanding your power and sitting in the power of your own soul. Those are the moments when, but you're probably not going to not necessarily going to experience the emotion within the meditation or within the sitting in the power practice. But what will happen is that practice, by opening your mind and really becoming aware of your own power, it will start to bring those emotions to the surface. And you might be doing, walking the dog or doing the cooking, and all of a sudden that emotion will break the surface and you'll become conscious of it. As soon as you are conscious of it, don't then suppress it and go, okay, well, I've acknowledged that now, I'm going to move on and do my own thing. You've got to relive. We've got to then go through a period of self-reflection. We've got to relive that emotion. And those emotions will be connected to particular life experiences that we've gone through. And as we begin to explore those emotions, that the life experience that it's connected to will also come to the surface. And we have to keep reliving that experience in our life that we've gone through. And the more we experience it, almost like a distance becomes apparent where we can start to see it for what it really is. And then we can begin to understand how that's affected us in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way. And then we can forgive and go through that period of healing. And that doesn't mean that we are going to be what we were before the experience happened. It means that we're going to accept the experience for what it is and treat it as a friend rather than as an enemy. And when we get to that point of acceptance, we're then comfortable, or more comfortable to a degree, and we can start to find peace within ourselves. But it's not one experience. You'll find it will be hundreds of things you have to go through. It's tiring. It's not comfortable. Will take you to the depths of your soul. I always say to people, if you're going to start sitting in the power, it should come with a health warning, because it does take you to the heights of yourself, and it also takes you to the very depths of yourself, and it will be a very emotional experience, but one that, when we're coming up to Easter now, when we're talking about spiritual renewal and being reborn, that's what we're talking about. It's about getting to know yourself and really accepting who you are and being reborn in that way.
Wow, great explanation. Well, I'm sure that definitely helped answer that one. Now, Anna says, after you have your recipient and already have 5 pieces of validation, what happens if the sitter doesn't want the evidence because it may be something she's afraid of?
So you're saying that you're starting a communication with someone. You've said 5 statements about the person's life, and you're starting to unfold that story. Then the person says, "I don't want you to go any further."
They might be blocking it because they don't want that to come through, I think.
Right. So you have to just respect that person, and again, we have to understand that, okay, my job as the medium, actually, and this might not sit well with some of you, but I think it's the truth. My job as the medium isn't about serving my recipient. It's about serving my communicator in the spirit world. So I'm not going to allow the recipient to determine who comes or tell me who they want to hear from. I'm going to move my mind to the spirit world and allow the person in the spirit world with the greatest need to communicate with me. And I'm going to do the best job that I can do for them. I'm not going to sugarcoat their lives. I'm not going to turn something negative into something positive. I'm just going to give the best, most honest, objective, expression of themselves that I'm willing to experience. And I'm going to do that. And if the recipient says to me, "Look, I understand what you're saying, but I don't feel comfortable," then I'm going to say, "That's fine. I'll stop there. So thank you for coming. I'm glad you've accepted this communication. If you're not ready for that communication, that's fine. Your loved one will try again at some point, I'm sure. But I would then I might do one or two things. I might try to give them might blend with them psychically, if it's a private sitting, and understand what they're going through. That means that difficulties they're going through, that they can't accept that communication at the moment. Try and help them with their own emotions, trying to help them to understand what they're going through and to help them on their own personal spiritual journey. Or if it's just the fact that the person doesn't like the communicator and doesn't want to hear from them, then I'll just say, well, okay, I'm sorry that's the case, and I'm glad you've accepted this part. I appreciate you don't want the communication, and then bring the sitting to an end. You have to always respect. You can't force these communications onto people, Our job is to serve the spirit world, but we've also got to understand that for that communication to take place, it has to be the right time for both the spirit person and for the person in the room, that the recipient. And although my first allegiance is with the spirit world to serve them, I also have to be very sympathetic and have a duty of care for the person that I'm giving that communication to. So you've just got to make sure it's a sort of consensual, very much a consensual moment. And as soon as the person says, I'm not comfortable, you have to respect that and stop. So I hope I took the question in the right way. But I think if that's what you meant, then that's the answer.
Yeah. Okay. So now we have one that says he just wants some tips on developing mediumship in solitude during, obviously, quarantine. Things that they can do on their own, in this time that they have.
The truth is, for the medium, all you need to develop your mediumship is an empty room and a chair, which is ideal for solitude, really. Just sit. I think you can do 90% of your development by, like I said, self-reflection, building that power, becoming aware of the reality of the power of your own soul, building a relationship with the spirit world, becoming aware of the power of the spirit world, and allowing that to become real to you. All that can be done by just through sitting quietly and allowing that power to build. So, I would be recommending, and I recommend for every student that comes, you should be sitting for a minimum of an hour a day, every day, 7 days a week. And now, actually, for the first time, perhaps in this generation, everyone's got time to do that. So there's now definitely no excuses. When I often ask students, and I always do when I have a new group of students, how many of you sit regularly within the sitting in the power practice an hour a day? Out of a group of, let's say, like, just make the maths easy for me. Out of a group of 10 people, one person will raise their hand. So
at least they're being honest.
Right. So that's like, 10%. When you then question them a bit further and see what they're actually doing, they might be doing guided meditations, they might be doing relaxation, they might be, they're not really doing the practice that's needed for the mediumship. That figure becomes reduced even further to like 1%. When I've calculated it, like when I've done ask people, and I think about it, it's probably about 1 or 2% of students are actually doing what's really needed to develop their mediumship. And then we wonder why the standard of mediumship is what it is, and why lots of students that try to develop their mediumship are having difficulties. It's because we're not doing that basic spiritual awareness and building that power so it becomes real to us. If that power doesn't become real to you, if you haven't accepted that you are a medium and you've experienced the spirit world as a real world, and we've experienced the spirit people as real people, then if it's not real to you, it's definitely not going to be real to the people that you're working for, the recipients in the room, the audiences. So that is really, the biggest part of your development, which now there's no excuse. And often, there's a famous biblical quote that says, many are called, few are chosen. And for our purposes, there's going to be lots of people that have that mediumistic potential to some degree. Very few of those are going to have the discipline and the dedication to actually develop it into something that can be useful for the spirit world. So you've got a question, because you've got that potential within. Okay, that's one half of the coin. What we've got to now question for ourselves is, are we willing to dedicate and sacrifice to become that instrument for the spirit, that we can actually become the voice for that of the voiceless? We can turn that invisible world into a reality for other people. And I have to say, there's an awful lot of sacrifice that is required. When I look back over my own last 15 years, I've missed lots of weddings, birthdays, funerals. I couldn't even attend my own auntie's funeral because at the day of a funeral, I had a group of German students coming from Germany, and I had to say, well, sorry, family, but I can't let 12 people down that have come to England. I've got to go there rather than. So that's the sort of that is the level of dedication, and sacrifice that is required often. And I think we've also got to, and I'm going off the point now, but I hope this will be valuable to people. We've got to remember that becoming a full-time medium or making it this big part of your life, it actually isn't for everybody. I've recently just got married, and I'm now saying, well, look, I can't travel 40 weeks of the year. I can't be away from home all that time. We have to find a balance between the spiritual mediumistic expression that we need to express, because that defines who we are and it's the natural expression of our own self. But that we're in the physical world because we need to have a physical life and to live as well. And what I would say is get that balance right, sit in the power, develop your mediumship. An hour a day is nothing. But always make sure that we don't forget about the living, because often the medium spends so much time with the dead, they actually forget about the living. And you've got to get that balance at all times within your development. It's really important.
And you always say, Andy, that you don't believe that a true medium is made, they're born, don't you? What you were talking about just then? Yeah,
I mean, what people often make this distinction or get confused about what we mean by the mediumship being a gift or being like an ability. I'm very much of the school of thought that says, look, it's a gift. And what do I mean by that, first of all? Well, I recognize that in the world there is a power that we call the spirit. It's a universal power that runs through all living things. And that power has created within the universe similarity and diversity. That is that there's a billion lines of creation. And although there's similarities within each line, no two lines actually touch, and that shows you the intelligence of that power. So what that means is, of course, is that although human beings are all similar, they're all uniquely different. The way that those qualities of that power of the spirit manifest within the individual are unique. And some people are endowed. That's what that means. The way that, when I say endowed, I mean by the way that those qualities have manifested within their soul from the moment of birth. They're endowed with certain talents and certain gifts. So some might have the gift of music, some might have the gift of business, some might have the gift of writing, some might have the gift of mediumship, some might have the gift of football or of hockey, or everyone's got a talent. And it wouldn't make sense to me that every single person in the world is going to have the talent of becoming an ambassador for the spirit in terms of being able to develop the mediumship to a point of doing demonstrations, sittings, and so on. It doesn't make any sense, because if you look at the rest of the human expressions, that doesn't make sense in everything else. I know I can't become a ballet dancer, and I know I certainly can't become a singer. I just haven't got the qualities for that. So mediumship is a gift in the sense that potential of mediumship, to develop it to the point of being able to actually communicate with the spirit world, that potential is there from the moment of birth. It's endowed from that greater spirit in the way that those qualities have manifested within us as an individual. Now, I do believe that every single person can have an awareness of the spirit world. That is, that we're all capable of having spiritual experiences. We're all capable of having an awareness of that power and having an awareness even of the presence of our loved ones. But having an awareness and having those sorts of experiences doesn't mean necessarily that it can be developed, that we have the potential that it can be developed to the point where there can be an active communication that takes place. And so it's all about, again, people want to say, well, I am a medium or not a medium. That's two extremes of the scale. And some people are going to have no mediumistic quality whatsoever. They're just not going to become aware of the spirit world. They have the potential there, but it's never going to manifest because of the way they've been conditioned, their ideas, the way that they live life. That's the one end of the scale. The other end of the scale is you can have people like Jesus, the master mediums that are going to be, the leaders of that generation within that particular expression. And somewhere in the middle, you're going to have most other people to one degree or another. And so it's not about, when you start developing your mediumship, it's not about, okay, I'm going to develop this to become a world-class medium, or I'm going to develop this to make an income, or I'm going to develop this to become famous. It's about wanting to develop it because it's there. We've discovered it, first of all, and there's a calling. Like I said, many are called, few are chosen. There's a calling to experience and to explore that particular expression. And then rather than worrying about what we're going to do with it, we should just be developing it to see where we can take it. And it's not about comparing ourselves to other people. It's not about where we are on that scale. It's about fulfilling our own potential, being the best that we can be with the qualities that we have. And, you know, and I'll be really honest, I see thousands of students over, you know, the years. And I know just from my own, you know, rational mind that not every single student that I teach is going to go on to become a medium and work on a platform and work in the sittings. And then people say, well, okay, why do you teach them then? Because it's not wasted. By looking at their mediumship, by developing these spiritual practices, by having this awareness of that power, they are going to look within themselves and find their own gifts and talents if they are not that of mediumship. I've had many students that started off wanting to develop mediumship, have become book writers, have become photographers, have become, you know, musicians, have become nurses, have become lots of different things. But through the development of their mediumship, that those practices have led them to find the gifts of their own soul, and then they've explored, they've discovered those, and they've then gone on to lead very satisfying lives because of it. So even if that mediumistic potential isn't there to the degree where we can communicate with the spirit world, by looking at these spiritual practices and even experiencing the spirit world to the degree that we can experience it to, it will ultimately reveal to us what our true expression is. And this is why I say to all mediums, and I say it to myself too, I'm only a medium, and while those qualities within me need to be expressing my mediumship, and I hope that's my whole life, but I'm also open to the fact that one day another expression may need to be expressed within myself. And the day that happens, I'd be more than willing to stop working in the way that I do as a medium and developing those qualities of myself that need to be expressed at that point in my life. And so you can't enter into the development process with this fixed idea that, okay, I'm going to become a medium and I'm going to work on a platform, or I'm going to do private sittings, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. You've got to see it as a journey, and you've got to be open to allow that power to lead you wherever it is that you need to be. Because surely it's much better to live a life that's in harmony with the true quality of your soul than forcing yourself to do an expression that isn't quite right for you. And ultimately, that is why I encourage everybody to look at mediumship and the psychic level, because whatever happens, it's going to lead you to find the true you. For some of you, that will be mediumship. For some of you, that will be becoming a teacher of mediumship, or becoming a healer, or becoming a trance medium, or a physical medium, or a demonstrating medium. But for other people, it will be something completely different. But this can be a means to help you identify that true calling. And for me, that is the challenge that's open to everybody. That's the meaning of life. You can say today, Andy Byng has given me the meaning of life. Look within, find the quality, the true expression of your soul, and then allow yourself to express it and experience it in this life. For me, that is the meaning of life. So I hope that
beautiful. We have another one from Anna, who says, if the spirit world is as similar as our earthly experience, is there any growing up in heaven experienced for children that have passed?
Yeah, I think the difficulty that we have sometimes is that we always envisage everything in a sort of material, physical way. That is, when we look at ourselves as human beings in this world, we see children, and we see all of us aging and growing in a physical way. Of course, like, now people are going to argue with me in different ways of this, but in the spirit world, it's not that I'm going to age physically, because I haven't got a physical body anymore. It's not a world of matter and physical, it's a world of mind. And so when we talk about, rather than talking about growing and in a physical way, getting bigger and aging, we have to talk about, I guess, maturity and the spiritual maturity. Of course, the inner life that we have, which is truly who we are, matures with age because through our experiences and the unfold and our understanding of that internal world that we have. And it's the same in the spirit world, that those children, if we've lost children, if we've lost babies, or if you've lost young people or even old people, that progress, that spiritual, moral and intellectual refinement of the self is what continues on. And again, when people say to me, well, look, I had this personal spiritual experience where, for instance, and I hope it never happens to anybody, because I think it's the worst thing, but, I saw my child and I had this experience of them 30 years later where they were now a man or a woman. Like they came as an adult man or an adult woman. What I would be saying is, first of all, enjoy, cherish that experience. It's a profound experience to have. But is that what they actually look like in the spirit world now? Or is that simply a representation of the fact that they have spiritually, morally, and intellectually refined themselves? And that's the way that we can perceive that power now, in that, because they have become more mature and older in that sense, rather than actually physically looking that way. I don't think any of us really, people have talked in the past historically, if we look at 19th century spiritualism, about the etheric bodies and about the different spiritual bodies that still have some form. I genuinely couldn't tell you if that is, fact or if it's just a theory. It's a speculation. Until we get there, we're not going to know fully. But is it that we've got these different spiritual bodies that have form, or is it that when we have these spiritual experiences, that the way that we perceive that power and the reality of that soul is with that image? I don't know, and none of us are going to know until we're there ourselves. But I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So next one we have is, are you aware of the communicators before you start your platform work at public events? I hear mediums talking about the spirits queuing up prior to the live event. Is this what occurs?
As a demonstrating mediumship is something that I've always been heavily involved with, and it's really been the kind of the focus of my own expression over the last 15 years. When I do a demonstration of mediumship, I'm actually trying not to become aware of my communicators before the demonstration. And the reason for that is because if I'm aware of a communicator like an hour before my demonstration begins, then what I have to question then is, well, am I going to start to kind of colour the experience, start second guessing myself, start changing the experience itself? Also, I'm not going to be able to hold my mind with that within that communication for an hour before I begin. When I'm driving my car or I'm saying hello to people, my state of awareness is going to then slip. So when I start my demonstration, I can't even guarantee that communicator that was aware of an hour ago is actually going to come in the demonstration. So then I might become aware of another gentleman, for instance, and then I'm trying to put the experience that I had an hour ago, I'm trying to put that into this experience that I'm just having, but there's two separate communicators. So you can get into a real mess. So what I would say is, just before, what you'll find is that, it's like 5-10 minutes before you start, maybe 15 minutes before I start to build a power, and I start to allow my mind to move, but I'm not becoming aware of a person in the spirit world. I'm just becoming aware of the power of the spirit world as a world, just becoming aware of that reality. And then usually if you're at a church, and not always, there'll be a piece of music played before the demonstration. As I'm listening to that music, I'm allowing the music to affect my own emotions, and I'm allowing myself to become more emotional, and then I'm moving my mind to the spirit world. And I like to become aware of my communicator just before I begin, like 5, 10, 20, 30 seconds before I stand up to start speaking. Sometimes I'm not even aware of my communicator until I stand up and start to speak. And So I try to not have an awareness of my communicator prior to my work, because what I really want is a live communication. I want to become aware of the communicator in the moment, experience that in the moment, understand it in the moment, so I know that I'm actually having a valid experience. And I think what stops people from doing that often is trust. Of course, before you start a demonstration, even after 15 years of doing them, there's still a moment before where you think, is it going to work tonight? Is it going to be okay? It's that anticipation. We have to have that trust, and in our own mediumship in the spirit world, that in that moment that we have to become aware, the magic is going to happen. And it's when we have that insecurity that we then often try to become aware of things in advance to give us that security and to give us that little bit of confidence. I would try to encourage you not to do that, but just to trust in the moment that when the communication happens, it's going to happen.
Like you were saying before, surrender.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, just a couple more, Andy, and then we'll finish things up. Why is it that sometimes a medium cannot connect with the other side?
There's lots of reasons for that, and again, one of the things that I feel is really important to realize is that when you're going through things in your own life, perhaps difficult experiences or positive experiences, that changes the nature of you, and it also can affect your ability to allow these emotions to be triggered and to surrender and experience the spirit world. So one answer to that is, are we in the right place in this internal world that we have? Is our internal world in the right place where we can actually allow that communication to take place? Sometimes we have to also understand that, in a demonstration or in a private sitting, there's lots of ingredients. One ingredient, of course, is the spirit world. Perhaps on their side, they're not able to manipulate that power in the way that's needed to enable the communication to take place. We often think of the spirit world as these sort of like infallible beings who are always right and perfect, but they're not. They're just human beings. They're just like us, still learning, still growing, still experimenting, and still trying to make the best of it from their side. We've also got to understand that each individual communicator, is to one degree or another going to actually be a good communicator or not a good communicator. That is that I really believe that those in the spirit would have to learn how to move their awareness, and to how to blend and allow that blending to take place with the medium. So sometimes the communicator that comes just isn't a good communicator. That can happen. Often another reason can be the recipient as well. I remember doing a sitting for a lady. She'd come all the way from Norwich to Birmingham, which is a 5-hour drive. And I didn't know she was coming from that far. But when she came, she sat with me, and I was aware of her son, and I was aware that he was involved in a car accident and it was involved a truck or a lorry. We call them a lorry in England, but I know different places call them different things. But after that, I just couldn't get into the power of the communication. It just wasn't happening. And so I had to abandon the sitting. I said, I'm really sorry. I'm aware of your son. I know this, but it's just not working. And then I said to them, can I ask, have you really had a lot of expectation about what's going to happen? Have you been really building things up? She's like, well, I saw you demonstrate in Norwich a few months ago, and I really enjoyed it. And I knew this was going to be like a wonderful experience. And on the way down I've been like praying for 5 hours, like bringing my son there, trying to make it happen. And in a way, what happened in that experience, and again, it's not to blame anyone, it's just naturally what happens, is that we built such an expectation and such an emotion and actually a tension that created a barrier. You got to remember that it's not just my power and the spirit person's power, it's the power that's created in the room that has an impact too. And so what happened is that I said, well, look, if you told me you were coming from Norwich, I wouldn't have let you come, because I'm actually going to be in Norwich next week. So here's like a refund. I'm really sorry to waste your time. When I come back to Norwich next week, I'll come and do a sitting for you at your house. So the week after I came, I think by that point she probably thought it was going to be rubbish, and was because of the first sitting she just travelled 10 hours for a sitting that didn't quite work.
Let it go.
But she let it go, and when she let it go, and we had another sitting, it worked really well because she was relaxed now, and she hadn't built up this real big expectation and this tension within herself. She was more relaxed, and that helped too. So there's like an infinite amount of things that can cause that not to happen. But again, what some mediums do is, rather than seeing it as a natural part of their mediumship, that sometimes it isn't going to work, and sometimes it's going to work better than other times because there's lots of different ingredients that have to happen to make it work. Rather than just accepting that as part of the experience, we start to beat ourselves up, crucify ourselves, not allow ourselves, we start to lose our confidence, get frustrated, and you can't let that happen. Mediumship is infamously capricious. It comes and goes, it ebbs and flows, and you have to take the rough with the smooth, and just realize it's a mystical experience that you're having, and not every single time you try to have that experience can it be what it can be. We have to learn. And the other thing, one last thing that just comes to my mind, I also have learned over the years that in certain demonstrations, for whatever reason, it can be the audience, can be me, can be the spirit world, can be a combination of all those things, that sometimes I know that what I'm capable of achieving isn't possible. And so rather than trying to force that to happen and keep pushing for for things, you have to just accept that on this day, this is what can be achieved. So as long as you achieve what is possible to achieve, you've done the best, you've had the best experience that you can in those conditions. And that's what we have to also remember.
Okay, I'm just going to do one more from the comments. Sorry if you've got another question that you'd like to ask Andy. We're just going to be mindful of the time because I also have a question, Andy, from somebody that asked prior to the stream. So this one's actually a good question because it ties into the last person's question. So the question is it possible to move from blending with spirit to channeling with blending with spirit to channeling with spirit?
Okay, so again, if we're talking about quick channeling, we'd call it trance state. You've got to remember that there's an infinite different degrees to which that trance state is possible. Deep trance, there's different sorts of trance states. But the trance mediumship is just an extension of the evidential mediumship. That is, that with the evidential mediumship, we blend to a certain degree with the spirit person. The trance mediumship is where we're able to blend into a deeper degree, but also we move from a passive active state into a purely passive state. So what I say to people, and I try and be honest about it, is look, if we can't blend to a degree where we allow the spirit person to influence us and allow us to have those impressions and those experiences of their life and express them in a passive active way, if we can't blend to that degree where we can consistently achieve that, there's no way we're going to be able to blend to a degree where we allow the spirit person control, and we can blend to that degree and that passivity where that trance state can really happen. So is it possible that you can go from evidential mediumship into a trance state? Of course it is, right? But the other question is, how do we move into that trance state? Well, first of all, if you look at the great mediums of the past, trance mediumship isn't the first thing that has usually been developed. It's usually later on in their development because they've mastered evidential mediumship first and learned how to work in that power and how to develop to that degree. And as they sat regularly in the power through the meditation or sitting in the power practice, they've then learned how to experience that power to the degree and to surrender to that power and how to surrender to that power in the degree that's needed to allow the trance states to happen. So that's not to say, some mediums right from the beginning of their development will move into that, will be able to develop that trance state because they've already in that awakening of their mediumship and in that early part have been able to experience that power to the degree and surrender to the degree that's needed to achieve the trance state. So there's not one size fits all, but for most people, you'll find that the trance states will come later on in their development. And the other thing that I would say, and it's not part of the question, but I think it's a valid thing to say, is I've always been taught that it's best to be master of one than jack of all trades. That is that in my development, I discovered my mediumistic qualities that were there. I allowed them to come to the surface, and I allowed that power to direct me into how it needed to be expressed at that time, which was demonstrating mediumship. And I've spent 15 years developing that. And about 5 years ago, it happened naturally. There was no conscious effort, no conscious training, but the healing quality of my mediumship, like spiritual healing, just naturally started to come to the surface, and I was drawn and had experiences, opportunities to practice and express the healing. And now the healing has become a big part of my development. If you'd have said to me 15 years ago, Andy, you're going to become a healer, and I know this is really bad to say, but it's the truth. At the time, when I was ignorant, I was an 18-year-old kid, just started understanding mediumship, I had no interest in healing. I thought it was a waste of time, because for me, what was important at that time was that evidence. That's what I was drawn to. That's what my soul needed to express. Now, healing is a big part of my work, both through self-development, but also through spiritual healing, because that power, as I've developed and dedicated myself to that one expression, and I've unfolded my soul, these other qualities have then come to the surface. And now it's then the right time for me to A, to appreciate that gift, and B, to express it. And so now I've incorporated healing into my work. I'll develop that and my mediumship to a point that then hopefully in the future, other gifts will naturally come to the surface. And when they do, that's then the time to develop them. So my advice is go within, find the quality of your mediumship, and let that power direct you to how it needs to be expressed. So don't go with a preconceived idea of I'm going to be a healer or a speaker or a medium. Let the power determine what you become, because that's how it needs to be expressed. Focus on developing that. Don't spread yourself too thin. Don't become jack of all trades. Just focus on that one gift that's there on the surface. Be patient, because it is a virtue, I promise. And then you'll find the other gifts will come later on when they need to.
Great. And that ties me into the last question from Karen, who says there's been a substantial shift in the literature on mediumship and communication recently. People can suddenly spontaneously channel vast amounts of narrative and dialogue from recently deceased loved ones, almost enough to write a book, and they are writing books. Is this inconsistent? This is inconsistent with her experiences as a medium. It's as if anyone can pop up, like Maurice Barbanel, Silverbird. I won't name any of these books, but the literature colours what people are expecting of mediums. Can you comment on this trend? And also on the idea that people can spontaneously and without any training transcribe entire books?
Okay, so there are cases, of course, where people have had no formal training and are able to achieve these states, but these people have usually been people that have sat for years in development, and have built that power, built that understanding of that power. And for that person, as that mediumship has come to the surface, that power has then, at the very beginning of their development, led them to move into those trance states. So that does happen. So of course that is possible. But the thing is, this is what I think is the bigger question, and the most important question is about the veracity of the writings themselves. I think this is what the question is sort of alluding to. When you transcribe a book, channeled philosophy or teachings that we are saying is coming from the spirit world, the veracity of those teachings, or the truthfulness of those teachings, is dependent upon the genuineness of the mediumship itself. And that has always been the obstacle within spiritualism, is that when spiritualism as a religious movement says, look, these are the teachings of spiritualism, this is the philosophy of spiritualism, and this has come from the spirit world, well, then the veracity of those teachings and that philosophy is dependent upon the genuineness of the mediumship that has expressed them. So, of course, like what I would say to you is read the book. If you've gone and witnessed that medium and you've experienced their trance mediumship and it's genuine and it's good trance mediumship, then of course the veracity of the teachings is going to be there too. The question is, and this is the big question, what is it? What are the key what are the key indicators that what we're witnessing is good trance mediumship? For me, there's only the main indicator isn't the quality of the voice or the accent or the facial changes that take place, because we can all develop an accent and change our face without the spirit world being present. There's two real ways. The first one is what is the quality of experience that we're having, i.e. when we're sitting there within that trance mediumship, am I really aware, truly moved and aware of the presence of the spirit person and of the spirit world? The second thing, and this is the most important point, does the intelligence that is being conveyed within those trance talkings or those transcriptions, the book itself, does what is being written, does it go beyond the medium's own intelligence? Right, because think about it. If we're saying that we are blending with the spirit world and this higher mind that's more evolved than ours is communicating with us, then what is being communicated should express a higher form of intelligence than that the medium is capable of them in their own waking state. If what is being written is only the same level of intelligence and of knowledge as what the medium has in their normal waking state, what does it actually prove? Because I could just sit there with my eyes closed and tell you, if I sat with my eyes closed now and put on a voice and changed my face and said exactly the same things in these questions and answers that I've just said, it doesn't prove anything other than that I've put a voice on and I've sat with my eyes closed. When I'm in that trance state, there is ideas and thoughts that exceed what I'm capable of expressing and knowing in my own normal waking state, then there's something happening. Now, what do I really mean by this? Well, there's been certain instances in the past, for instance, where trance mediums of one particular trance medium, Piper, went to a university in London in the early 20th century, and she sat with a room full of expert scientists and spoke for 20 minutes on astrology that only 3 or 4 people understood what she was talking about in the world.
Mm.
So the information and the things that she was discussing was only known to a select few physicists who had studied that. And it was very difficult, complex maths and difficult, complex theories. The medium that herself had no formal education. What we're seeing there is that what is coming from the medium in those trance states far exceeds her own abilities and intelligence. Or, for instance, again, other cases where mediums in the trance state start to speak fluent languages, foreign languages, that the medium in their own normal waking state doesn't understand or has access to. That's telling us that something is happening, that this other mind, this third intelligence, is actually communicating. And I would say, and not just with trance books, but with every sort of mediumship, you have to be critical. Silver Birch, if you've quoted, said, "We want you to question everything."
Mm.
Because the veracity of those teachings is dependent upon the genuineness of the mediumship. So when you read these books, by all means read them, but you've got to be critical of what's being said. If you actually haven't witnessed the mediumship, because you don't know the quality of what it is that you're reading until you've seen the mediumship. And that is the fairest that I can be. You know, I'd always say to you, even with teachers of mediumship or anything like that, go and watch them work. You know, what is the quality of their own mediumship? Especially if you're wanting to be taught, you know, training evidential mediumship, for instance, the teacher will only teach you what it is that they do themselves. So the first thing I would say is go and look at their work. Is it what you feel mediumship should be? And have they developed their mediumship to a point, a depth and a point where they really understand their own mediumship and can express it to a higher degree? Because if that's not the case, then that's going to be reflected in their teachings. The same with these sort of trance books that you read. If you really want to know if what I'm reading is valid and is genuine, then go and look at their mediumship. Is it? And if you can't do that, then by all means read them, but you have to be much more critical about what you're reading and give it less weight than if you've actually gone and witnessed the mediumship for yourself. I think as a teacher of mediumship, you know, I have a responsibility really to make sure that people, the information that we're kind of disseminating to the general public isn't full of myths and misconceptions and misinformation, but that we're trying to give a very transparent and open and honest account of what it is that we do. Not just the positive things, but warts and all. That's what I really believe in. And so I'm very critical about what I read. I'm very critical about other people's work, but if I'm honest with you, I'm much more critical about my own. You know, and that's the thing. If you become critical about your own work than everybody else's, then you've got the right sort of mindset. So I hope that helps, and I hope I've done a good job answering the question for you.
I think everyone that's joining us today will certainly agree that you've given some really valuable information throughout this live stream. And, you know, I'm very thankful that everyone that joined us today, we had enough patience with us over the last couple of days to let us ride through those technological issues. We did it. We finally
got there in the end.
And you know, if you are interested in these sort of live interactive talks where you can ask your own questions about mediumship, then, you know, join me in the next couple of weeks. We'll be joined by many other mediums that want to step forward to help you answer your questions. So now, Andy, you are doing some live training at the moment now that we're in quarantine. How do people connect with you?
If you're interested in any of the courses, online courses that I'm offering, just go to my website. It's www.andybyng.com. It's BYNG. You'll see on the homepage there all the different courses that are there. And I also do a free, once a month, I do a free lecture online called Spirit Talk. If you go on the website, at the top of the website, there's a Spirit Talk button. Just register and you can get the updates for the free lectures as well.
Perfect. Okay, thank you everybody again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all for the next one. Thanks, Andy, for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Incredible guidance for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.